that's a sticking point for me. I have no problem acknowledging that people derive value from their beliefs, whether or not they map to anything in reality. That they can be inspired.
Well, see, there's already a problem here, which is he's defining reality as the material, and Peterson would not acknowledge that. He thinks, or I would think that he thinks.
I thought it would be nice if we started with something quick and easy and simple, like God. In particular, I don't believe there is one, and I have no idea what your thoughts are on it.
You mean on the fact that you don't believe there is one?
I mean just about the subject in general, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts on about what I don't think is, well, maybe.
So this is a bit of different video from our glorious benefactor, Travis Pangburn. Apparently he'll be doing some claim analysis of himself, so I will be probably reacting to that as well. Good start so far. This conversation kind of gets heated, but it is always good to see a little bit of levity. This is awkward.
Well, it's a complicated problem. And I don't think that we take it with due seriousness. I specifically don't think that the celebrity atheist types, who I actually have a fair bit of respect for, by the way, take it with due seriousness. So I don't think that they take it with due seriousness from a biological perspective or a phenomenological perspective or a literary perspective or a metaphoric perspective.
Fair enough to the people who don't like Peterson. This isn't really an answer to the question. Hopefully he gets to it.
That'll do for starters. I've become convinced that the fundamental presuppositions of our very functional cultures, or Western cultures say, are nested immovably in a metaphorical substrate. And that when you enter that metaphorical substrate, you're in the domain of religious phenomenology. And I think
Travis is kind of stealing my job here, unfortunately. Maybe I'll scrap this video. We'll see how entertaining I can make it. If you're seeing this, I figured I did a good enough job. What Peterson is saying is basically what Trav has on the text, is that because the metaphorical layer is necessary for Western society to exist, because it's where the assumptions are, and because that layer is religious, therefore religion is necessary to the cultural assumptions of the West, and therefore the continued existence of the West. That's kind of his argument.
I think that not only can you derive that conclusion as a consequence of deep philosophical thought and literary analysis, but that if you know enough about brain function, you'll also come to the same conclusion. I think you come to the same conclusion as well if you look at the evolution of religious cognition from the perspective of an evolutionary biologist and not from the position of a evolutionary biologist whose head is addled by the belief that most of human morality was established in the 500 years since the Enlightenment.
So he's talking about biologically instantiated morality. You see a lot of this in chimpanzees. Chimpanzees have tribal, troop behavior, they have war, but they also have reciprocity. They don't like tyrants. If a chimp leader is a tyrant, his two underlings will team up and kill him most of the time. So lots of biological a lot of morality is instantiated kind of biologically in a lot of our ancestors. That's what he's referring to.
Start, I guess.
Except, and so you have to bear with me.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Texas.
That's okay. I'm from Alberta, you know. It's bigger than Texas. Just as bad.
Dillahunty's got the cowboy boots.
So the curious thing for me is all of that applies, seemingly, if I'm understanding it, to religious thought, religious tradition, the value of religious identity to individuals. And I don't see that any of it relates to whether or not there is a God or whether or not there's sufficient reason to believe there's a God, which is my sticking point. I'm fully fine with the idea, we'll try and get through this without, raucous applause, but, hey, at least I got one.
Yeah, you don't never complain about raucous applause.
Because that's a sticking point for me. I have no problem acknowledging that people derive value from their beliefs, whether or not they map to anything in reality. That they can be inspired.
Well, see, there's already a problem here, which is he's defining reality as the material. And Peterson would not acknowledge that. He thinks, or I would think that he thinks that reality is less about what we can materially demonstrate and kind of just a structure that we can discover by discovering what works. And you can do that scientifically and materially, showing what works. Oh, this is a solid, I can bang my hand against it. But also, if I live my life oriented towards the highest good, that also works. And that's also a part of reality, just as real as the physical. So already in there, where Dillahunty makes a distinction between deriving real value from a story, whether or not it maps onto reality, to me, at least, there's a very real argument that that's exactly the same thing. That if you derive real pragmatic value from a story, that makes it part of reality, depending on how you define reality. So, something in there, interesting idea.
And motivated, educated, and enlightened by poetry, prose, metaphor, allegory. But my concern is, having grown up a fundamentalist Southern Baptist, the people who I know and some of the people who are working to enact legislation on behalf of their beliefs are convinced that they have good reason to believe that there actually is a God, not just that it's useful to them.
Well, not just useful to them, useful to society writ large. That's different, right? Because if you view religion as just a structure that makes a convenient excuse for you to do the things you like, then basing things off religion, if you're a non-believer in the literal truth of religion, is completely ridiculous and condemnable. But if you understand what people think of religion as something that is useful to all of society, irrespective of the literal reality of a God or not, then using religion as a justification for legislation all of a sudden makes a hell of a lot more sense. So again, tiny little things like that, very small framing issues, very small word choices, and they're not even exactly issues. I don't think Dillahunty's being dishonest. It just shows how he thinks, but that betrays how he thinks, and like those tiny little underlying assumptions about what reality is, about what religion really is, informs why he comes to the conclusions that he does. So a lot of the time when you're listening to people like Dillahunty or listening to any public intellectual really, that includes me, not as a public intellectual, but as somebody who you can do this with. If you listen to their conclusion seems to follow from the premises. Take another look at those premises, because a lot of it is like, a lot of the issue is in those premises, and those very tiny, very detailed framing choices within the premises. Those tiny details is what kind of makes all the difference.
Well, it's not that easy to distinguish between what's useful and what's real.
Oh.
So.
Okay. Very cool. Okay, yeah. Okay, he said exactly what I said. I even very nice. I have seen this before. This overall conversation, not this particular clip. So I'm not just doing the thing where like I know what he's gonna say and I say it first. But I guess I suppose he's shaped my thinking to some extent, or I knew that he might think this. So very cool.
So I think that distinction can be made, but it's a lot more difficult than people generally think. And I also think that there's no doubt that there are different levels of sophistication of religious belief. What I see happening in this sort of discussion, say frequently, and again, like I said, I have a fair bit of respect for the atheist types because they spend a lot of time thinking, and that's generally a good thing. I see most of their thinking, however, directed at the fundamentalist types, the fundamentalist Christian types, mostly of the American persuasion, who suffer from the somewhat understandable illusion that the biblical corpus has the same epistemological and ontological status as a scientific theory, when it clearly doesn't, right? I mean, if you're...
Okay, now...
This is an important point, and Dillahunty's going to go on to it, is that you should not, if one is to defend the Bible, you shouldn't defend it as true in the same sense that a scientific textbook is true. You should defend it as true more in Peterson's sense of being useful. And in some cases, again, it depends on the religious person, and I'm sure I'm blaspheming according to somebody right now. And there are some things in the Bible that, if you want to continue to believe the religion, you kind of have to believe, literally speaking. But this is right. The Bible is not a scientific textbook, nor should it be treated as one when evaluating its truth content, because unless you accept the premise that all truth and all reality is fundamentally material, which Peterson doesn't, and I don't think anybody really should. I think it's more complicated than that. I don't think that the only things we interact with in reality is the material. I think we interact with a lot of things on different levels of analysis.